Hey, Life Science. We've talked about the basic anatomy of plants. We've discussed leaves, roots, and stems. Now it's time for us to talk about various ways of classifying plants according to some defining characteristics. First up, we've got the bryophytes. So bryophytes have no vascular tissue, so their size is limited because nutrients can't be transported very far. If you had a really, really tall bryophyte, the top of that plant would starve because there's no way to get nutrients and water that far without vascular tissue. So there are actually 3 phyla of non-vascular plants, but most of them are in phylum Bryophyta, which contains the mosses. Now, you know moss, it's like that really, really small, kind of fuzzy feeling plant that usually grows like on tree roots. That's phylum Bryophyta. So let's talk about moss for a minute. Moss is composed of many tightly packed individual plants, and they are composed of leafy shoots and rhizoids. So the leafy shoots are tiny stems with even tinier leaf-like structures. Oh my goodness, this is so cute. They're like little teeny tiny baby plants. Get a hold of yourself, Mr. Estes. You can do this. So they're 1 cell thick. Oh my goodness. Okay. 1 cell thick. And they directly absorb nutrients that they need from the environment while performing photosynthesis. I can do this. They're just so cute. So the rhizoids are strands of tissue that anchor the moss. They're actually not roots. There's no vascular tissue to transport nutrients. Moss must absorb water with their leafy shoots, again, since they have no roots. They're so... So, of course, then they also must live in a moist environment. So, no roots, they can't transport nutrients up a tall plant. They have to absorb water and nutrients with their leafy shoots. They do all their photosynthesis in this tiny little cell-thick leaf. Moss, man. Moss. So there are some seedless vascular plants. Most plants are vascular plants or tracheophytes. Think about like your trachea. That's part of your... it's a tube that you breathe through, so it's a related term there. So phylum Pterophyta would be the ferns. That is a seedless plant. It does not reproduce with seeds, but it is a vascular plant in that it has xylem and phloem. Ferns can usually be found on the forest floor, but they can also grow on other trees. They're not parasitic like the mistletoe was, but they do form root hairs. They collect water and nutrients that have collected in the cracks of trees' outer bark. They can also grow slender trunks, sometimes up to 60 feet tall. There are some things that look like trees that are actually ferns, but the trunks aren't a wooden mass, but they're actually a network of hard stems. So tracheophyta would refer to any vascular plant. There are some that are seedless, such as ferns. The seed-making plants, they are the 2 most populated phyla. So we've gotten the non-vascular plants out of the way. Then we've got the seedless vascular plants. The 2 that contain the most species are the seed-making plants. And of course, they are all vascular. So Coniferophyta. Those are evergreens or conifers, giant redwood, and sequoia trees. They reproduce by making cones. So seed cones, like, pine cones, they are the female reproductive organs, and they contain egg cells. It's actually the pine cones which are the reproductive part of conifers and pine trees. So pollen cones, they're the male reproductive organs. They look like little knobs on the ends of the branches. Now, pollen is a fine dust that contains the sperm of seed-producing plants, the male half of a plant's DNA. Wind can carry pollen from a pollen cone to an egg cone. So the egg cones close, the pollen attempts to fertilize the eggs, and once fertilized, a seed begins to form. When it's ready, the cone opens up and it releases the seeds. So that would be the reproductive cycle of a conifer or an evergreen, part of Coniferophyta. Coniferophyta would probably be a better way to say that. Anthophyta, those would be the plants that produce flowers in which their seeds are produced. So flowers produce both sperm and egg cells. The sperm is produced on the stamens, that's where the pollen comes from, and eggs are produced in the ovaries. This is a great lesson to do in the spring because, well, allergies, and this is where flowers are starting to bloom as well. So Anthophyta, we've also got this going on. The fertilized ovaries develop into fruit, which encases the seed. We're going to talk a lot about fruit in a later lesson, but fruit is the product of a fertilized egg in a flower. So let's talk about seeds for a second. Seeds have either one or two cotyledons. A cotyledon is a seed leaf, which develops as part of the seed. It provides nutrients to the developing seedling and eventually becomes the first leaf of the plant. It's an important part of the seed that is an essential help to the germinating seedling. So plants can be characterized and classified by the cotyledons that they have in their seeds. Monocots, that would be class Monocotyledonae, so that the cot part of monocot is short for cotyledon. They just have one cotyledon in their seeds. Dicots, that would be class Dicotyledonae, they have two. Two cotyledons versus one cotyledon. That is an important distinction to make between classes of plants. So here's some important distinctions to make. You could just copy this whole thing down in your notes because it doesn't get any more basic than this. We're going to go down and compare monocots to dicots. So first, the leaves of plants that are monocots have parallel venation. Remember, that means that the veins all go in straight lines down from the petiole to the apex in parallel lines. However, dicot leaves have a netted venation. So the vascular tissue of a monocot is round, but in a dicot, the xylem in the roots form an X shape. In a monocot, fibrovascular bundles are found throughout the stem, so they can never be woody stems. But for dicots, the fibrovascular bundles form a ring near the outer part of the stem, so pith tissue forms inside, sometimes breaking down and leaving a hollow stem. So before we move on to this slide, I just want to point out something that you may have recognized already that maybe you just didn't notice. You notice that monocots can never become woody stems, and also their leaves have parallel venation. So think about leaves that you may know about that have long leaves. They're not, wide and branchy, but they're long and they're thin, and they have parallel venation. How about something like, say, grass or corn? Those leaves have parallel venation. Does corn grow on trees? No, it can't, because monocots do not form woody stems. All right, well, let's move on now. Okay, last slide. So monocots have xylem and their phloem arranged together in their fibrovascular bundle, but dicots, their xylem and their phloem are arranged separately in their fibrovascular bundle. Monocots have fibrous root systems, whereas dicots have a taproot system. Last of all, monocots have flowers with petals in groups of 3 or 6. But dicots have flowers and petals in groups of 4 or 5.